sounds like this. E Bwana, tunakuomba amani kutoka mbinguni, na kwa wokovu wetu, Bwana uturehemu. That last line, Bwana uturehemu, that's the beginning of, that is, Lord have mercy. It's what God's people, because he is indeed our loving, merciful Savior, and he delights in our calling on him. All around the world, people sing those words in their languages. The church has always sung. Music is part of God's good creation and has always been a part of worship and will continue throughout eternity. Music carries the word of God. Lutheran churches all over the world ask the LCMS for help with hymnals and faithful worship. They want the gifts Christ is offering, including the music of the church. I've been blessed to be working with churches around the world on hymnal projects for the past 10 years. This was prior to this call. The first hymnal project I got to be a part of was for the Lutheran Kenya. That church body had been in existence for over 60 years, but didn't yet have their own hymnal. They also didn't have enough pastors, so one pastor often serves several congregations. Imagine a typical Sunday morning, no pastor, also no hymnal, but one member perhaps was given a hymnal by her neighbor, so she brings it and they sing a few songs out of it. Gradually, the doctrine of those hymns becomes their own. Sadly, that songbook was from the Pentecostal church or the Seventh-day Adventist church, and this congregation has now been catechized out of the Lutheran church. Hymns teach us. A hymnal makes a difference in worship. With our assistance, the Kenyan Lutheran Church now has a hymnal, Ibada Takatifu, Divine Service. Here's a picture of vacation in 2012. I completed that hymnal as a volunteer, but it established me in this role or vocation, serving God's people as a hymnal developer. 2 years after that hymnal was published, the Ethiopian church, Mekane Jesus, approached the LCMS asking for help with a hymnal. So I attended some meetings with their leaders and with leaders from the Office of International Mission to decide if the circumstances and timing were right. The country of Ethiopia is just north of Kenya. The two countries share a border, but the circumstances of their respective Lutheran churches are quite different. The Kenyan Lutheran Church has about 10,000 members, the Ethiopian about 1 million. The
How many
country of
million?
Ethiopia, 8, maybe 9
8 million?
now.
Gotcha.
Yes, yes. The country has been quite isolated for much of the 20th century, and it was contact with the LCMS that really caused them to want to become more Lutheran. A common request that we hear is, we're Lutheran, but we're discovering that we actually don't know what that means. Could you please help us regain what it is to be Lutheran? So we study their hymnal, and we look at the liturgy and the hymns and the prayers and the small catechism, and together we work out what will serve their church best at this time. That language is Amharic. This is a page from their new hymnal. Music is one of God's most wonderful gifts to us, and hymns combine music and theology in a way that carries his word deep into our hearts and souls. The Lutheran Church has a treasure in our hymn. Here's a picture of the dedication of their hymnal. The title is Sebhat La'amlak, which means Sing to the Lord. It was dedicated last Reformation, 2019. Here's another picture from dedication. It happened in the city of Addis Ababa. We have 2 missionaries teaching there, so they are also delighted to have this hymnal for worship and teaching and for mission work. Okay, let's move on to Asia, because that's where my future work lies. This is an unusual perspective of the globe. I like it because it shows all the area that I go to. I've been in East Africa. You keep on going east and you get to Asia. So we're going to visit Indonesia and then Taiwan. Although in reality, I actually fly west to get to Asia, not east. Indonesia is a Southeast Asian country consisting of many islands in the Malay archipelago. It's the world's largest island, actually, with more than 17,000 islands. The capital is Jakarta on the island of Java. The leaders from the GKLI, the Indonesian church, have been anxious to have a faithful hymnal. They understand the importance of the liturgical life for the church. Here's one of the workshops that we sponsored where seminarians and pastors and musicians gather so that they can learn more about God's gifts in the liturgy. Lord willing, and with your support, they will complete in 2021, book Divine Lutheran. A relatively short trip north from Indonesia brings us to Taiwan and mainland China, where the church body is the China Evangelical Lutheran Church. This hymnal is in Mandarin using traditional notation. It will serve Mandarin-speaking congregations in Taiwan and mainland China, and somewhat in the LCMS as well. Here's what a hymnal looks like. You might notice the numbers above the staff. That's a numerical notation. It's a traditional Asian notation. Some people use that. Some people use the Western notation. So it was decided this hymnal needed to include both. In this case, test book, like the right first step. We had several pastors who came to us saying, I understand a hymnal can take several years to make. In the meantime, could you just get me the order for divine service? I have people who are hungry for the Holy Communion, and I need to have that divine service. So we set to work making this test booklet. Here's President Miao and President Harrison dedicating that test booklet in March of 2019. We've been astonished at the requests for that book, not just in China and Taiwan, but in Australia, Sweden, Canada, and even the North American Lutheran Church here in this country. With this new call as a sacred music educator, I will get to spend more time with the people, sharing Jesus through music. I'll be teaching hymns to people, teaching musicians how to use the hymnal and play their instrument, sharing the treasures of the Lutheran Church in Asian Lutheran churches where they also want faithful worship in their own language. We want to make sure that everyone can sing, Lord have mercy, in their own tongue. Would you partner with me in this work? Join me on the journey. Please consider supporting this work with your prayers, your encouragement, and your financial support. Together, we can share the joy of Jesus with our brothers and sisters around the world.
Amen. I saw a couple fun things in there, Sandra. One was almost the very last slide. I saw you had my my friend and former classmate Michael Paul there. Where does he serve now? Do you know?
He is in Hsinchu, Taiwan.
In Taiwan.
He teaches at the seminary there, and he has a congregation there.
Yeah, Mike was in college with Catherine and I. We served in college together. And then I noticed when you had the picture with Pastor Harrison and I think it was Pastor Miao that Pastor Harrison didn't have any shoes on. Is that because he was being a hillbilly, or is that something else? Or was he just hot? Just curious.
That is the culture in Taiwan.
Okay, that's what I figured.
You do not wear shoes in buildings. It's been crazy to see pastors come out dressed in all their robes and either socks or bare feet.
Right. Take your sandals off. The feet on which you stand, or place on which you stand, is holy ground. I like it.
Yes, that's right.
Fun. Very fun.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Sandra? Why don't you stop the sharing on your screen, Sandra? And then there we go. Excellent. Anybody have any questions for Sandra along the way here? I see Seth or Tina Pierce, please.
What about me?
Hi, thank you.
And then also Heather and Dick, I think.
Yeah.
But Seth first.
Hi, thank you for being here with us. Interesting, you said they're asking the LCMS, so I'm assuming they're asking the United States LCMS to help, but not like Germany. Can you talk and speak to that a little bit? Is it because of your particular work that ties it to our little area?
Right. I would say not my work, because it's before that I'm brought in. It is because of things that they've found online and because of missionaries that we have, that they realize that the LCMS actually holds to the Bible. That's what we hear all the time.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you so much.
All right, Heather, and then Dick. Those are the ones I see
Okay,
next.
I guess my question was, is there a favorite hymn that you've worked in translating? Or, I know you shared one at the beginning, but tell us more about the hymnody.
Yeah. One of the challenges is to decide, which hymns we should really stress that they translate, because it's tough to translate hymns. It's a huge prospect to do that. And so we try to be really careful. I would say, Salvation Unto Us Has Come. That's got to be like my all-time favorite, because teach the entire story of salvation in that one hymn. And if they can learn that, pastors can preach on it. It's got law, gospel, Jesus. It's all there.
It's all there. I see a couple questions in the chat before I get to Dick. The first one was, is the music translated into the sound and, quote, vibe of the culture and people, or is it the arrangement, or is it basically Western music?
Mostly we have used the original tunes. It's the same tunes that we have in our hymnal. We're not adamant that it has to be those tunes, but we find that what they have in their culture does sound Christian to them, and actually these things sound that churchly sound is pretty universal. Yeah,
that's fascinating, and of course that's that is a huge deal, not only in mission work, but where we are is how do you use music in service of the gospel and not in service of the other? And of course, we have lots of cultures that are represented in our hymnal, so it's not like every hymn is German or anything to that effect. Right. Yeah, that's a whole topic, which I'd love to hear more from you about at some point. Dick, you've been very patient.
Sandra, glad to have you with us. Thank you. I was a missionary in West Africa with John Dutzman. Do you know him?
John Dutzman. I don't, but I've seen that name.
Yeah, he became director of the radio ministry in Ethiopia.
Oh, wonderful.
I thought maybe you were acquainted with him. He's home now. He's getting older. But anyway, thank you for being with us and sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Another question I see from the chat is, do they use instruments, and what kind of instruments do they use?
Okay, of course, it varies by the country. Drums, in Kenya, drum is probably the most, or maybe a little tambourine, something that you shake, is most common. In Ethiopia, keyboards, electric keyboards that you plug in. And sometimes guitar. Guitar is also very common. Very few places that have organs.
Gotcha. Yeah,
they just can't.
Yep. And of course, you haven't spent a lot of time yet in Asia, I'm presuming. That's right. Yet to come. So we look forward to hearing how that changes and what you learn along the way. Are there any other questions for Deaconess Sandra? You just got me all excited for you to come out here and talk to us more. It's awesome.
I do have a question about
Rick.
Do you know some foreign languages and so on and so forth? Seems very difficult to do this.
Yeah, I am not good at languages. I don't know what the Lord was thinking. I have a hymnal committee and I rely on translators. It's my expertise is in the hymns and in entering the hymns in the computer and helping them get it on paper and get copyrights and all that. And since I work in so many countries, I can't possibly, I can't learn the languages other than hello and thank you.
Right. Interesting. So you do the music end, and kind of the layout and a lot of the organization and kind of and maybe some of the kind of theological decision making on what hymns to try and learn
Yes.
first,
Yeah.
etc.
Right.
That sounds like good deaconess stuff. I like that. That's fun.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any choirs is another question we got in the chat.
Yes. Most of them have, most of the countries I've been at, they have good choir traditions. And we definitely teach, hopefully they use the choirs to teach new hymns. Some of the cultures are challenging because they prefer to have their choirs up in front dancing. We work with them.
Sure. Well, and I'm sure that Pastor Fro could or Deaconess Pamela could pipe in on this too.
Yeah.
It's always, and I mean, honestly, this is true here in the United States. It's always an interesting mixture to sort of see. You have people that come from lots of different cultures, from lots of different backgrounds, and some of those backgrounds are Christian. Some of them are not Christian. Some of the ones that are Christian are not our tradition. And how do you figure out what are things that are not the way that we've done them but are fine, and what are the things that actually are leading people away from the gospel? There's a lot there.
Yeah, you're right. There is so much there. But probably if the choir is blocking the view of the altar and the cross, that's probably not a good sign.
Yeah, that's I like that.
Thank you.
Pastor,
that's what we taught.
Yep, we do that all. We talk that way too. Pastor Fro.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that one thing that Sandra has done, which she is maybe not aware of. Not only has she helped form the Abadakaka Tifu, but at my request, when I was tasked with teaching Abadakaka Tifu, she sent me hymn tunes, and we had the liturgy of the entire hymn book
on her piano.
From her piano. And that has
recordings, do you mean?
Marvelous work, Sandra. I have passed out so many flash drives with those tunes on it for the pastors of the ELCK. It's actually unbelievable, and they have mostly figured out how to use them wisely. So thanks for that, Sandra. I don't know if you were aware of that, but it's been a great blessing to the church.
I love it. I see another comment in the chat. A couple people asking if there is any place where we could hear some of this music being sung. Any recordings? So I know that's a part of what you had in the presentation. Maybe if you can email me the full presentation, then I'll figure out a way to be able to play that. That could do a little bit of it.
I will do that. That'd be great.
Okay. And I would just put the bug in your ear that as you're developing your network and such, having a website that kind of picks a few of these really solid hymns. I'd love Salvation Unto Us Has Come as such a great example. And maybe having that, okay, now let's listen to it in Kenyan, and or in Swahili. Now let's listen to it in this and that. That could be a lot of fun.
Cool. Okay. Good idea.
Yep. I like it. Heather, you have your hand up still, that I see at least.
Yes, Sandra, you and the pastor answered my question, though. Very good. Yay!
Great.
All right, awesome. Are there any other questions for our deaconess? Oh, God bless you, Sandra. And we are so glad that you've joined us this morning. You're welcome to hang out with us as we're beginning our study of 1 Peter. You're also welcome to go as you see fit. Okay. And this has been super fun. I love it.
Yes, it has been. Thank you.
Very good. And again, greet Pastor Stuckwish for us.
I will do that. Thank you.
All righty.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Now let's move back to what is our regularly scheduled program here. Give me just a moment along the way. Okay. There we go. And that is, again, I think that's going to be, I think that Sandra is really going to be a fantastic fit for us in terms of a missionary and the work that she does that is so kind of lines up with our own congregation's interests. Obviously, we're a very musical congregation. We do a lot of things with music all the time, and so I think that this is just a fantastic fit. So I look forward to figuring out ways of partnering with her more. So let's get going and start talking a little bit about First Peter. We've got about 25 minutes or something like that, so that will be enough for us to at least get started a little bit along the way. My guess is that most of you at some point or another in your life have probably read the book of First Peter, maybe done a Bible study on it. I know that you have heard portions of it because we've been having a collection of readings throughout this Easter season out of First Peter, and frankly, that's what's kind of gotten me interested in doing a little bit more careful study of Peter. I think it will be a lot of fun, and it will be very useful for us. I had a couple other people that asked me about what would be some good books of the Bible, or what would be some good areas in the Bible to study, especially for new Christians, for people that are new to the Christian faith. First Peter is an interesting one for that, because it deals so well with some of the things that we are dealing with personally right now, but also a lot of much more universal themes of sin and grace, forgiveness, and also has a nice section on sanctification. So it's got a lot of stuff in there. So I think that will work quite well. Just a little bit about the Apostle Peter. His original name is in Aramaic is Cephas, but we know him as either Simon the fisherman, or the name that Jesus gave him, which is Peter, which means rock or stone. So you may remember that from Matthew chapter 16. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And you can see in this image in front of us that Peter has a big set of keys, and you can even see that these keys have little crosses on them. Very, very often in Christian artwork, I would say almost always, Peter is depicted with a set of keys because of those verses in Matthew. His feast day is June 29th, obviously one of the early leaders of the Christian church. You really have in the book of Acts, which our men's studies have been working their way through, kind of the first third of the book of Acts in some ways centers around Peter. And then it moves to Paul in the second 2/3 of the book. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but certainly if you were to ask one of our Roman Catholic friends, Roman Catholics would look at Peter as the first pope, or the first head of the church. We don't buy that as Lutherans, but that is certainly kind of a part of the language and culture that you will hear very often around the Apostle Peter. Anybody have any questions as we're kind of moving along here? I would encourage you also to ask questions in the chat, as well as holding your hand up, etc. Right, we're good. So this image is of 1 Peter chapter 5, and this is from a 3rd century manuscript or 4th century manuscript. a part of what I think is interesting as you kind of look at these sort of documents, and a lot of this has to do with how expensive paper was in the ancient world. That there are basically no spaces or almost no spaces between words. Here you can see a teeny little space in there, that kind of thing. And there's no punctuation. So to our kind of look at it, it just looks like a giant block of things. Occasionally you might have something else, some art bit, but this is the sort of thing that it would look like. It probably even would have, at least in the first century, would probably have been in a more in a scroll format and not in a book or codex format. So this is a couple pages out of a book. There you can see the kind of the spine along the way there. The epistle itself, we don't have a date for it, but we know it was written before the destruction of Rome. Obviously, it was written before Peter was martyred. It is pretty much universally believed in the ancient world that it was written by Peter. There's basically no argument in the ancient world about who the author of this epistle was. You do get plenty of argument about 2 Peter, and when we're done with this, maybe we'll move on to that. But 1 Peter is pretty well believed to be written by the apostle before he died, probably late in his life. As you may remember, I listed him as dying 64 AD, sometime before the Great Fire of Rome. But that is a matter of church tradition. That's not kind of an absolute fact that we know for sure. It's also mentioned later in the book, in chapter 5, that one of Paul, I believe Silvanus was also one of Paul's assistants, traveled with Peter and assisted with him, maybe as a scribe or a I was going to say a dictator, but that's probably not the right term. Probably scribe is better. I see a question or something coming up in the chat. Let's see what we got there. Is that relic written in Greek? Yeah, this is Greek. It's one of the other interesting bits about this is that in very, very often in Greek, it's written in all capitals. When we, which also makes it a little bit harder to read. You can almost make out here, this word right there is a pi. Petros, that one that looks like a P is a rho. So that's, or Petron. So that's kind of how we get it. But yep, that's all Greek. It's all Greek to me. I cracked myself up. All right. Other questions along the way? Yes, please, Rick.
Well, if you show us that the bottom of that page, what is that tornado kind of thing looking at the bottom?
I don't know. I was hoping nobody would ask me because I don't know. Oh. It's I was looking for a good image of a manuscript from in Greek, and this is the one that I found, but I would have to do a bit more research to figure out what the maybe it's I mean, it might be essentially graffiti. I'm not sure. It's a good question though. If I find out, I promise I'll tell you. All right. Any other questions that I can maybe know or maybe not know? All right. Our basic outline for 1 Peter. 1 Peter is also called sometimes one of the general or Catholic. That's what the word Catholic means, is general. It's one of the general epistles because it's not written to a specific church. So it's kind of like a circular letter, but not a circular letter like, send this to your 10 friends and you're going to get a bunch of money come back to you. Not that kind of circular letter. but it's meant that it would be sent to a church, and that they would read it. They would probably assign someone to basically memorize the book. That was a part that was pretty common, and then it would be given out to some other churches to read. So it would kind of go around. We'll see that in our introduction here in a minute. So we get and this follows a fairly standard format, I would say. You have a welcome, an introductory thanksgiving. You've got maybe 2 or 3 kind of big themes to what the work is, and here you're really talking about how do we live as Christians under suffering. And remember that I said that Peter was likely martyred under Nero after the Great Fire of Rome, and so we're very much at that time in the church, in the history of the church, when these persecutions might happen regionally, they might happen more universally, but Christians were often being persecuted for being Christians, not simply my life is hard, but I am being persecuted for that. And so there's a lot of talk in the book of First Peter about suffering and the relationship between suffering and joy, which I think is always an outstanding topic for us to kind of wrestle with a little bit. You also have some very concrete instructions. Do you remember when we were looking at Ephesians 4 and 5? Well, Ephesians 5 especially, you had some very specific instructions on how the family is to live as husband and wife. And if we went on to chapter 6 in Ephesians, we would have seen children and then other servants in the household, etc. We do get some of that similar sort of language here. These churches that Peter's writing to, many of these, I believe, were actually started by Paul. A lot of them are Gentiles, but not all. And so there is a lot of kind of very basic law gospel instruction in here, which is another reason why I think that Lutherans have often kind of resonated with First Peter quite a lot. I see a couple questions in the chat that are great ones. Would Peter, a fisherman from Galilee, have known how to write in Greek or even speak Greek? Would this have been written by a scribe? Well, in Palestine, in what we know from the Old Testament is Israel, you had several languages that were all being used, but particularly 3. You had Aramaic, which is almost a variant of Hebrew, so that would be kind of the religious language, and that's the ancient language of the Israelite people, is Hebrew. Our Old Testament is mostly written in Hebrew. Then you had Greek, which would be the language of commerce. And so Peter, as a fisherman, would certainly have known Greek. That would not be unusual at all. And in fact, pretty much everyone there would have known Greek. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase Koine Greek. Koine is a word that just means common. And so this is so the Greek that they spoke was Koine Greek. That's for the most part, that is the kind of Greek that is in the New Testament. If you're talking like maybe Homer, but if you were talking of if you were going to read some Aristotle, you would be reading that in I think that's Attic Greek, or we could probably call it Classical Greek. But Koine Greek was the language of the people in the Mediterranean world. This is kind of the universal language of commerce. Then the third language, which would be less known, but certainly would be known, would be Latin. At that point in time, the Romans would have been in control of most of the Mediterranean world 100 years, maybe, something like that. And so Latin was certainly the language of the military. It was kind of the government language under Rome. That was the language of Rome. So yes, that's the long answer to that question. How about the material itself? Do we know paper or parchment? Can't imagine anything lasting 10,000 years. I believe that one that I showed you, that looks to me like that is parchment, not paper. It does not look like an animal skin to me. But oftentimes these manuscripts were written in, and then they were sealed. Like if you know anything about, and you probably heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've talked about them off and on in class at different time. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and they were all, or the ones that were best preserved, were all these scrolls that were kept in these clay jars and then sealed so that they didn't, so that the moisture of the air, etc., kind of retained them. But having said all of that, there aren't that many documents that we have that are from prior to, let's say, the 3rd century. That's what made the Dead Sea Scrolls such a remarkable discovery, was that these were 1st century BC to 1st century AD documents, which is a couple hundred years older than most of the documents that we have. For instance, most of the Hebrew, most of the manuscripts we have of the Old Testament are dated from the 9th century AD. So quite a bit later even. Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions before we kind of get to the text proper here? Have I forgotten anything important to all of my dear pastors that are listening in? Well, I don't see any rebuttals, so that's always a good sign, isn't it? All right. So let's look. We got about 10 minutes left, which is kind of what I expected, frankly. That's okay. So let's take a look at this at this apostolic salutation. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ, and for sprinkling with his blood. May grace and peace be multiplied to you. So a couple nice things that we get out of this. One is they always begin with who the letter's from, and Peter kind of establishes why he is writing to them right off the bat, an apostle of Jesus Christ. And so while the term apostle is occasionally used more generally, really most of the time in the New Testament, you're talking about one of the 12. So this establishes him as speaking with a particular authority. Then we get to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. So we get 3 fun words in there. The word elect means chosen, right? So an election is a choosing, literally. An exile is someone that is forcibly kept away from their home. And then dispersion, which is a very, I don't know, I don't really love that translation. Sometimes you'll see it called the diaspora, but think of it as like exile, someone who's been forcibly taken away from home, and that should bring images of the Babylonian captivity to mind. Because that's called the exile, when they were taken, that we're talking 6th century BC, they're taken from their land in Israel, and they are carried off to Babylon. But now we have these exiles who are dispersed or scattered throughout the in these 5 specific places: Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Now, you may be asking yourself, where are these places? Well, let me tell you once that comes. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that. I see a question in the chat. What translation is used here? I almost always use the English Standard Version as the translation that I'm going to use, largely because it's the translation that's in the Lutheran Study Bible. So that's the one that we read on Sunday. That is probably the one that today is most commonly used in the Missouri Synod. There was probably 20 years or something where we used the NIV, so that would probably be the next most common. But this is ESV. So if we look at these places, here is Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and notice we're not talking about Asia like Deaconess Sandra was talking about, Asia and Bithynia. All of these are taking the whole thing. All of these are a part of what we would look at as Greece. Greece is the word. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. So these are all regions or areas in Greece. These are places that were mostly places where Paul established churches along the way. Not entirely, but mostly. I think I see a couple of hands. Paul, Schubring, and then Pastor Meyer. Paul, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yep.
Pastor, I hate to tell you, but that's Turkey, because we've been there.
You're right. As soon as I said that, I thought, Ephesus, isn't this part that's over here? That's Greece, and then this is Turkey.
Oh, Pastor, this is the Bosphorus right here. That defines Asia. That defines Turkey. Greece is in Europe.
Greece is over in Corinth.
Well,
And Athens.
Well, I knew that. I thought that Greece went over that way too, but I'm happy to be wrong. See, this is why I pay you guys, to kind of keep me on my toes. That's what I get for doing these things in the mornings. All right, let us continue. Pastor Meyer.
Yes, when we get to that salutation,
okay,
are these elect exiles? Are these chosen to be exiles and to be in this area? Or to those who are elect, and who are
that's an interesting,
the exiles?
Right, that's an interesting question. So elect, chosen, are they chosen to be exiles, or are they the chosen ones who are exiles? Do you have an opinion on that, Pastor Meyer?
I always thought that these are those who are chosen. They happen to be the ones who are the exiles.
Gotcha.
However,
so you would take
President Emeritus Robert Newton always liked to put the comma after exiles, that we were chosen to be exiles. And that applies to us today, who are chosen to be exiles as we are scattered throughout the world to be witnesses.
Well, it is kind of an interesting question, and I can certainly see an argument for either way with that. I'd have to do some more.
Yeah. So we are the chosen.
On that.
We are the chosen. We are God's people. But it happens to be at this time that we are exiles.
Right. So the question is whether elect there is a noun or an adjective. Is elect the noun, or is it modifying exiles?
Yes.
All right. I'll see if I can't do a little bit of digging on that and try to come up with an answer, because I don't have I haven't looked at that close enough to have a super strong opinion of it. All right. Any other questions or comments along the way here?
There's one in chat.
Go ahead, Jerry.
The term exiles, has been used with the people of Israel. To me, it seems to imply that this is being written to the Jews in dispersion, but I thought this letter was intended for Jews and Gentiles.
Well, and I think that's precisely what Peter is doing here. Is and Paul makes this point several places in Romans, but I would certainly argue that Peter uses this term exiles very intentionally to refer to the church, that the church is the new Israel, that the church are now the ones that are Israel. There we go. That the church are the ones that are scattered throughout the world. But certainly you're right that historically that term does refer to the Jews who were carried away to exile. But there are lots and lots of places where in the New Testament where terms that were used, maybe not exclusively of Israel, but often exclusively of Israel in the Old Testament, are then kind of co-opted to refer to the church. And this would certainly be one of those cases. But there's no doubt that there are Jews present, because there's a lot of this kind of very specific language that is going to have significance for a Jewish Christian, like the sprinkling with his blood. I mean, that brings up temple sacrifice imagery just right away. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I have one.
Dick, please.
The Concordia Bible before the one you have came out.
Right.
First verse is written even differently.
Let's have it.
To God's elect, comma, strangers in the world, comma, scattered throughout Pontus, etc., etc., etc.
Well, that is interesting, and that's NIV, and so and that, I don't know, where would they have gotten the world, because that's just not in the text, which is a part of why the NIV I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. That is interesting though. And strangers is a it's not, and again, that's not a technically accurate translation, but it certainly gets the sense that these people who are scattered are perceived as strange and peculiar in the world. And remember, this is actually the book where we get that you are a peculiar people verse later on. So yeah, I think we'll come back to that imagery again and again. Are there any other questions for today before we call it on this? All right. I am not.
This is Howard. Can you
All
hear
right,
me?
Howard. Yep.
Now, this sprinkling with blood, is that got to do with the Lord's Supper? Which is not really sprinkling, it's drinking.
Yep. Well, this is that phrase, sprinkling with his blood. I mean, my first read on that is that connects to that connects to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. That this is how Jesus was was the sacrifice that was made for the sins of the people. So while that doesn't have a direct connection to the Lord's Supper, the first connection is to Jesus' work as the sacrifice. Certainly that's kind of down the road. That's a part of the implication, I guess. That's how I would read it.
So that it was not like the sprinkling of blood and throwing it on the altar in the Old Testament.
Well, I think that's what it's referencing, is the taking of the blood, and part of it is put on the altar and part of it is put on the people. That certainly that's at least what it's alluding to, if nothing else. So, good question though.
Pastor?
All right. Yes.
Gil. I prefer the NIV versus the ESV because I think the NIV is more closely related to the KJV.
Okay.
It uses more common terminology versus the where so forth and all of those kind of words. But this verse also goes back to Ephesians 1:4, where it talks about that he's choosing us before the creation of the world.
Right. We get that foreknowledge language in there too, don't we?
Yes, so, we do.
Good. All right. Lots of good discussion. I think we're going to enjoy our study of 1 Peter. So, all right. I think I'm going to call it for us for right now.